I want to talk about the absolute mess of a situation that's going on between claimed voice actor Troy Baker. I'll just say claimed actor Troy Baker. And Gearbox, developers of Borderlands 3. I'm going to run quickly through the background of this, but it's been a series of back and forths. So originally, back in April, Randy Pitchford, the boss over at Gearbox and a complete asshat, claimed that
It's actually one of his credentials on his Wikipedia.
it is on his business card, and it's going to be relevant to this conversation and the irony behind it. But Randy Pitchford originally claimed back in April that Troy Baker had chosen not to reprise his role as Rhys, who is a character from Tales from the Borderlands, the Telltale series. Rhys does appear in Borderlands 3. A few characters from Tales from the Borderlands appear in Borderlands 3. And so I guess most people would assume that Baker would kind of reprise his role. But Randy Pitchford said in April that he would not. And he claimed that it was because Troy had turned down the opportunity. Troy Baker soon responded and said that he was incredibly interested in the role. He wanted to kind of maintain the quality of performance and kind of the consistency and have those original voice actors back. And he said that they wouldn't let him for whatever reason. So there was a lot of kind of unspoken, unclear stuff going on. So recently, this week, VG247, Kirk McKean, he did a whole feature on Troy Baker and Nolan North, and as part of that feature, he was able to talk to Troy Baker and ask him what had really happened. And Troy Baker said, and I'll read this verbatim, quote, "So they came to me and they were like, 'Do you want to do this?' Which I said, absolutely. And they made it impossible for me to do the role. It had nothing to do with money. They just simply would not go about doing it the way that we needed it to be done. So then it was like, I never said no," unquote. So that's very unclear. So as a good journalist, Kirk McKean asked him to clarify what all these vagaries actually meant. And Baker said, quote, "No, it was simply a matter of they wouldn't go union. And I can't do a non-union gig." And without getting too deep into the weeds of that, we had long conversations about that. We always knew going into it that this is going to be the thing. They were going to take these characters and put them from Tales from the Borderlands series from Telltale into Borderlands proper. I've been waiting for this call. They were like, "Do you want to do this?" And I said, yes. Because they never would move from that position. I'm not mad. It's invariably a completely different character, but it still stings. There have since been developments in the story since McKean originally published that. Gearbox released a statement saying that Texas law prevents the studio from using exclusively union actors in Borderlands 3. To which SAG-AFTRA, the representative union for screen actors, basically responded that that's complete nonsense. And I'll read from their statement quickly so we can get into the conversation. But essentially, SAG-AFTRA said there's really no law prohibiting them from using union actors, and the union wasn't asking them to use only union actors. They were just asking to see if they did use union actors like Troy Baker, that all actors across the project would be treated fairly in accordance with that. And that does mean higher standards of treatment and standard pay. Gearbox is a company that has traditionally used a lot of its own employees and a lot of kind of non-union actors for its performances. And so I'll read from the SAG-AFTRA statement, which they said, quote, "Gearbox was unwilling to sign the contract and bind themselves to honoring those standards as reflected in the SAG-AFTRA contract." This is from continued Kirk McKean's reporting. This is Ray Rodriguez, who is a SAG-AFTRA's chief contracts officer. quote, they claim to adhere to those standards anyway. We have no way to verify that, and in any event, a non-binding commitment to treat and pay workers fairly is not enough. Workers deserve the protection of an actual contract. Our contracts do not and cannot provide different terms and conditions for workers based on whether they are members of the union. Non-members would enjoy all the same contract benefits as members, whether in Texas or any other state, nor would the contract prevent them from hiring non-union actors, unquote. So this turned into quite a mess, with a lot of different parties getting involved. And it's really a story about the complexities and the benefits of what unions can bring to an industry like gaming. And so I guess before we kind of dive into any specific questions I might want to interrogate, what do you guys make of this mess? What do you make of Gearbox's position and kind of the whole ensuing onslaught of statements and quotes from all these different parties?
Well, it seems like Gearbox, the best I can do, like if I give them the benefit of the doubt, I can be like, well, maybe they just didn't understand the situation. But seeing other things from Gearbox, and particularly Randy Pitchford in the past, it's hard for me to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I feel like they just did what they wanted to do and justified it after the fact.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I need a little clarity here. So, was SAG-AFTRA saying that if they were to sign on a member voice actor, that all of the benefits they would enjoy would then have to be given also to all of the voice actors that were a part of the project? So,
yes. And that becomes complicated considering that some of those are also employees of Gearbox.
Yeah.
Which Gearbox, I guess, a point of clarification and context. Another voice actor who originally played Claptrap earlier this year, he did not reprise his role in Borderlands 3 as well, and it was largely because Gearbox wouldn't give him additional pay and compensation for lending his voice to the project. And Claptrap, if you know Claptrap, talks a lot. He's a very chatty robot.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not the first time they've run into issues in terms of compensating their actors and their employees.
So Ashley Birch is a voice in this game, right?
She does, yes.
And she's a member of SAG-AFTRA.
As far as I'm aware.
So how does that work?
So, as far as I understand, SAG-AFTRA employees and actors can do non-union projects, but they're credited differently. They can be reprimanded by the union, and oftentimes you'll see this happened in animation a lot in the 90s. People would operate under pseudonyms because of the way the union would respond to them doing non-union jobs. I haven't gotten to the credits yet in Borderlands, so I don't even know if she is credited. I would assume she is, but there have been no credits in this game so far.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that she's in an uncredited kind of additional voices role, but she's a pretty major character, so I doubt it.
Yeah. So, okay. Thank you for the clarity. I mean, I'm with you. I think that it obviously doesn't reflect well on Gearbox to not want to enter into a contract because they don't want to give protections to everybody. And while I think we all agree that should be what a company wants to do, to provide the best working environment and the best compensation, I do think you bring up a good point, Cody, when you say there is a bevy of complexity when you start to recognize that a lot of these parts are handshake deals of, hey, you work here, you are a character artist for this, would you like to voice this individual as well? And how does that play into other kinds of compensation agreements that they may have with individual departments, if this individual gets these benefits, and for how long do they get the benefits? Is it just for the duration of the project? Is it for the duration of their employment here? Like there's a level of complexity within it where it makes sense why a company would look at it and say, we don't want to tread into those waters because it's too murky. It doesn't make it right, but I'm just saying it makes sense. But that's where we get to the part of unionization that's so important, which is that it only works well when you reach a tipping point in which everywhere you turn to find somebody to fill these roles, there are individuals that everybody is a part of this union. You know, you have to aggressively recruit people to join these unions so that companies can't just decide to go out. But the whole defense also of we're not allowed to discriminate about union or non-union is bullshit when you think about the fact that they've been given this contract and they clearly discriminated because of inclusion in a union. Like the right to work argument makes sense when you look at it on the surface of like, oh, well, we can't look at a non-union person and say, well, we can't hire you because we're only going after union people. But it totally falls apart when you look at this was the reason that they didn't allow Troy Baker to reprise his role.
Yeah, I mean, this gets to kind of a point. We've been talking about unionization a lot on this show, and I think it's interesting here because you do see, I mean, it does pose a point of complexity for a company, although Gearbox could 100% afford to pay the actors the union rates if they chose to. It's not like they're a small company. They're a pretty massive company. And based on the sales numbers for Borderlands 3, they're going to have even more moving forward. There's an inherent irony to the company that has made a game about massive corporations fucking people over doing the same to its own employees and to members of a union. Borderlands is a series that constantly makes fun of corporate culture and corporate assholes. And there's a company that is currently run by a corporate asshole who pennies and takes money out of the company coffers and clearly has screwed over voice actors in the past. I just think there's like you said, Larry, there's a certain point at which you stop giving them the benefit of the doubt, and that passed a long time ago. I don't want to hold a whole company accountable for the actions of its boss, but at a certain point, the policies of the company start to reflect that person. And so I kind of think that's this whole situation has revealed a lot of complexities about kind of the way this stuff works, but I don't think it excuses anything that Gearbox has done here. I do kind of want to address, we've talked about the benefits of the benefits of union work in the past, the benefits of what it means to be in a union. There are many, but clearly, as you said, Luke, it also presents a complexity when you can find alternatives to union workers. And it also presents a complexity when in an industry like the voice acting and voice work industry, a large reason why you see Troy Baker and Nolan North and Catherine Hale and all these actors you hear over and over again, a large reason you hear their voices over and over again is because unfortunately the SAG-AFTRA union for voice acting is still relatively limited in its scope. Meaning a lot of the companies are hiring union actors, but that pool of union actors is so small that you're going to see Laura Bailey pop up over and over again in games. She's one of the most notable actresses in the game, but I saw a lot of talk about the way that voice acting has essentially created kind of like a 2 caste system where you're either a Troy Baker or you're an unknown. And I think that's largely just because the industry is still catching up. That's at least how I see it. It's a union that's still gaining traction. I mean, they only really negotiated a deal how many years ago?
Like 3.
like 3 years ago. So it's still something that's building. But it does show you kind of the complexities of a working union when that union is still building itself.
Well, and when you start to think about where a lot of these studios are located, when you're thinking about Texas and North Carolina, those are the two big ones that come to mind. Like, those are right to work states where, you know, you can't be preferred or denied based on your membership into a union. So that adds a level to it as well, when all these companies are just looking to minimize the expense in creating these games.
Definitely. I feel ignorant in this discussion anytime we talk about unions, and I've heard a little from both sides. I work with a guy who was a mechanic for a long time, and he despises unionization because of the headaches that came with it in his area of the world. But I'm also from West Virginia, where I don't know how much you've read about the mine wars, but there were people that were essentially indentured servants, and unionization like liberated large swaths of people from where I'm from. So I recognize the good and the benefit, but I also recognize the headache and the transition. But just because a thing is difficult doesn't mean it's not worth undertaking.
Well, of course.
But corporations won't undertake the difficult thing until it becomes more convenient to undertake it.
And almost every single large stride we've had in whether it is improving work conditions or compensation for work, almost all of those have been led by unions that have called for those things. And, you know, I think back to some of the demands of the voice actor strike, video game voice actor strike. I mean, some of the ridiculous things that they were being asked to do, you know, 12-hour recording sessions and having to record screams over and over and over again. And like, yeah, it's not getting black lung or working in a unventilated factory or anything like that, but there are still real world ramifications to these things that are being asked of these voice actors. And on the other side of that coin, you have so many people who are willing to undercut those individuals who are seeking those protections and consider it the grind. You know, I'm making my sacrifices in order to get my foot in the door here. So they're willing for these companies that don't want to hire union workers because they don't want to have to limit themselves based off of the things that they say. There's always some Joe Schmo who's like, I'll scream into a microphone for 16 hours with no regard for my future well-being. And companies are just like, all right, cool. Yeah, we'll hire you.
Scabs.
What?
Scabs.
I don't know what that means.
So when the unions would strike in the mines, I assume this word's used outside of the mine strikes, but the workers that would come in and take their place and just suffer the conditions because, hey, it's a paycheck. They were called scabs.
Yeah.
Derogatorily.
Yeah. And I mean, this is an even more competitive industry than that, you know, in these creative industries.
Aren't lining up to go into the mines.
Yeah.
But people would love to get into the gaming space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's something that it does. I mean, that's kind of a symptom of capitalism in general. There's always going to be a space to fill. Someone to fill it. Corporations and companies will take advantage of that. But I mean, the reason unions are set up is so that despite the fact that Gearbox claims they meet or exceed union standards, that's an unspoken, not contractual agreement, which is not what you want as someone who's going to be yelling into a microphone for 16 hours.
And I feel like it's obviously not true, or they would have had no problem.
Oh, yeah.
Troy Baker. They would be, oh, yeah, we're exceeding those standards already. Like, it wouldn't have been an issue.
Yeah. It's kind of this has revealed the inner workings of so many elements of the industry. I think it's kind of been a valuable case study, but I also think it's a case study, and this is something I wanted to use as my topic a few weeks ago when I first started playing Borderlands. But I feel like the company's policies have started to mirror the design philosophies of the studio, in that they're severely lagging behind the times in every aspect. I mean, I mentioned the fact that some of these jokes sounded like they were written in 2015. and that's something you can kind of ignore because you're just going to be shooting things and you'll be listening to a podcast for all you care. It's a little bit harder to ignore when their behind the times policies are kind of actively hurting the voice acting industry and kind of creating rifts within their own company where people end up leaving because they're not being compensated fairly. So I did just kind of want to address very quickly as kind of a closing note. I know neither of you guys have played Borderlands 3. I'm sure you have heard some of the press around Borderlands 3, not just in terms of behind the scenes stuff, but about the game itself. Where do you see this series and this company kind of in the grand landscape of gaming? Obviously, the game was a massive success, despite its many flaws, and despite the fact that it might be a tired old formula and a tired old company.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
It may be a tired formula, a tired company, but it's a niche that a lot of people enjoy, and one that's not really overcrowded right now. I mean, you could throw Destiny, you could throw Division in that same space, but those are really very different games. Like you can't listen to a podcast and keep up with those games. I mean, some of the loot grind you can, but the story, like all that's very important in those games. The social aspect is very important in those games. But just like a mindless find a bajillion guns and just shoot everything, like it's kind of a unique thing. And so, to be honest, I've been surprised by the success of the game because I thought it's old, it's outdated, it looks like it was made in 2015. I had no interest in playing it, but clearly, like the desire for that type of game is there, and I don't think it has a lot of real direct competition.
Yeah.
So I think they can keep doing the formula.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that saturated fats and potato chips are terrible for you, but yet potato chips still get made and still get sold, and it's because people want those things from time to time. And I think the same has been proven with Borderlands and with the success of 3. Now, if they were to come out with a new Borderlands every 2 years, I think it would get tired and stale at some point. But I think as long as they're waiting years between these releases and releasing Battleborns in between, people are gonna love when they get their hands on. That was the name of the game, right? Battleborn. Yeah, okay.
I was just laughing at the game, not at you.
Introduced me to Alt J, though, so with that awesome reveal trailer that they had. Yeah. So there was something good that came out of Battleborn. But, so I think as long as they don't try to wear it out, there's always, I think, going to be a space for Borderlands out there that people are going to attach themselves to. And the people that attach themselves to that are rarely, in like a hardcore way, are rarely the people that care about these issues that we're talking about today, which may be reductive, but I don't think it's false. Yeah,
you're right. Michael Bay's still making movies.
It's true for Netflix as well. I just sort of, I mean, I bought the game, so I'm part of the problem. I'll openly admit.
Thanks, Cody.
But I wonder what the next Borderlands looks like, if there is one. I mean, there probably will be one if they've sold 5 million copies. I wonder if they try to do something different. But I guess much more concerning to me is the fact that they're unwilling to do anything different when it comes to their internal workings and internal policies. I can not so much forgive, I can ignore a really lazy game that relies on just outdated mission design, some lazy kind of borderline terrible writing. But when your company still operates like it's in the 90s and treats people like it's at the start of an industry, that's kind of when I start to become a little bit more critical. And I mean, I'm surprised. I guess I'm not surprised. Like the sales of the game speak for them. The sales of the game speaks for itself. But there was so much negative press around this game leading up to it, and it didn't make a single ounce of difference, which kind of leaves me feeling defeated in some ways. I don't know.
I guess I firmly cemented myself as a cynic on this podcast. But I just think so few people, in the first place, the number of people who are paying attention to those stories is low. And then the number of people that
Twitter feed.
Yeah. And then the number of people that care about it. Like even thinking about movies, like, that industry has been around for decades. And I feel like it's only been in the last 5-10 years that we've been making any meaningful strides for work conditions for anyone that's not a white guy, So I feel like we're probably still a long way out from these kinds of things dramatically affecting the sales of a game. And I don't like it, but I just feel like that's how it is.
Yeah, and we read the YouTube comments and we see these things being shared on social media and the commentary that goes around those from just the general populace. And it's not even that the people who read these don't care. It's that they're combative to the messaging and the changes that need. And like, I don't get that. Like, I get your corporate loyalty to Gearbox and your praise of Randy Pitchford as supreme leader or whatever. Like, but to bitch about the fact that people want better work conditions and yet Gearbox is standing in the way of allowing that to happen. Like, I don't know what part of your frontal lobe has to be missing in order for you to not be able to like empathize with individuals who are just trying to make a better way for themselves. And that the only reason they can't have that better way is because leaders like Randy Pitchford just want to save a buck.
Yeah. Well, it's selective cultural compartmentalization. I don't think once you start connecting the person who has created something and their actions with the thing that they've created and trying to reconcile those two, it forces you to kind of look at every single thing that you enjoy and is created like that. I think people will put up with a lot of absolute nonsense and bullshit before they even think to kind of question a purchase for something they are really a really big fan of.
On the combativeness side of it, I think a lot of that is influenced by the way people perceive work in the arts in particular. I think it's often not perceived as real work, right? So you're not trying to break your back in the mines. You're yelling into a mic, "Oh, big deal, 12 out," and that's not how I feel at all. But I think that's how a lot of people feel. They're like, "That's not real work. It's not real work. It's this gatekeeping mindset." And I don't think that's fair. But again, people.
At the same time, those are people's work who we've enjoyed for like hundreds of hours at a time. So
I think it is. I think it being Troy Baker's name attached to it.
Yeah,
because Troy Baker is like universally beloved in the video game industry. I think that may give the story a little more gravity than if it was even any other SAG voice actor outside of Nolan North. Maybe like if there was going to be somebody who had this complaint, Troy Baker would be the one you'd want because it would carry more weight.
Yeah, and something like this came up with Ashley Birch for Life is Strange. I remember. I don't think that got nearly the amount of play that this got, and there are obviously a number of reasons for that, probably both in terms of fame and in terms of gender. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the fact that this is Troy Baker, who's essentially the most ubiquitous voice actor of the moment, is pretty notable.
Yeah.
And probably will give this, hopefully, spark a conversation, although he hasn't released a statement since the story was published.